What if I told you that the reason you can no longer afford a home, the reason your grocery bill has doubled, and the reason your children's future feels like a shrinking inheritance was written down? Not in a budget meeting, not in a public manifesto, but in a series of classified memos deep inside the West Wing by a man the media calls a hawk, but whose real job was something much more surgical. His name is John Bolton, and for 40 years, he has been the invisible hand moving the pieces on a chessboard you weren't even allowed to see. Most people think of John Bolton as a relic of the Iraq War, a man obsessed with regime change. They think his secret files are just about bombs and borders. They are wrong. By the time you finish this video, you will understand that the Bolton Playbook wasn't just about invading foreign lands. It was about a fundamental restructuring of the American economy. It was a blueprint for a permanent state of crisis that required one thing to function: the systematic hollowing out of the American middle class. This isn't a conspiracy theory. This is how power works when no one is looking. This is the story of the files that will destroy the middle class, and the man who spent a lifetime making sure the door stayed locked. But today, the lock is breaking. To understand the files, you have to understand the man. John Bolton isn't a politician. He doesn't care if you like him. He doesn't care about approval ratings. He is a technocrat of chaos. For decades, Bolton sat at the intersection of the State Department, the National Security Council, and the private boardrooms of the military-industrial complex. He saw the plan before it was ever implemented. What was the plan? It was a belief that for America to be a global hegemon, the domestic population had to be transitioned from a producer class to a debtor class. Think about it. They told you that globalization would make you rich. They told you that spreading democracy would make you safe. They told you that the war on terror was about your freedom. But look at the ledger. Since the early 2000s, the era when Bolton's influence reached its zenith, the United States has spent over $8 trillion on forever wars. That's $8 trillion. Where did that money come from? It didn't appear out of thin air. It was harvested. It was harvested from your infrastructure. It was harvested from your healthcare. It was harvested from the very value of the dollar in your pocket. Bolton's secret files contain the internal justifications for this grand trade-off. They reveal a terrifying truth. The architects of our foreign policy knew that these wars would trigger massive inflation. They knew it would devalue the currency, and they knew it would concentrate wealth in the hands of the 0.1% who own the defense contracts. They didn't just accept this as a side effect. They saw it as a necessity. This is the insider secret. The middle class is the only group powerful enough to challenge the elite. If you are comfortable, if you are debt-free, if you are independent, you are a threat. But if you are struggling, if you are living paycheck to paycheck, terrified of the next interest rate hike, then you are manageable. John Bolton's career was the engine that drove that management. And the files he's left behind? They are the smoking gun of how the American dream was traded for a global empire. Let's talk about the playbook. This is how they do it. In Washington, there is a specific rhythm to how power is exercised. It starts with a threat. Bolton was a master of the threat, whether it was weapons of mass destruction in Iraq or the troika of tyranny in Latin America, or the looming shadow of Iran. The goal was always the same: to keep the public in a state of perpetual anxiety. Why? Because anxious people don't ask where the money is going. When you're afraid, you don't notice that the government is printing trillions of dollars to fund a conflict 5,000 miles away. When you're afraid, you don't notice that your local factory is moving to a country that the State Department just stabilized. When you're afraid, you accept the new normal. But here is the reversal. Here is the part they didn't expect you to figure out. The secret files aren't just about military strategy. They are about economic leverage. Bolton understood something that most economists are too scared to say: foreign policy is domestic policy. Every time Bolton pushed for a new round of sanctions, he wasn't just hurting a foreign dictator. He was disrupting global supply chains. He was driving up the price of oil. He was making your life more expensive. He knew that sanctions are a double-edged sword. On one side, they punish the enemy. On the other side, they punish you. They create the scarcity that justifies higher prices. They create the chaos that allows the big players to consolidate their power. Look at the screen. Look at the confidence. He's telling you it's for national security. But the secret files tell a different story. They speak of managed decline. They speak of strategic reallocation. In plain English, it means taking the wealth created by the American worker and using it to fund a global police force that benefits a handful of multinational corporations. They've stopped buying the illusion that this is for us. They've stopped believing that the trickle-down will ever reach the suburbs. They've started to realize that the files aren't a map to victory. They're a receipt for our bankruptcy. You see, John Bolton is the ultimate survivor. He has served under Reagan, Bush 41, Bush 43, and Trump. Presidents change. Parties flip. But the playbook stays the same. This is what we call the deep state, not because it's a hooded cult, but because it's a permanent bureaucracy of interests. And Bolton was its chief enforcer. In the 80s, it was about Project Democracy. In the 2000s, it was the Project for a New American Century. These aren't just names. These are frameworks for a world where the United States military is used to enforce a specific economic order. An order where the middle class is an afterthought. Think about the pattern. First, they identify a rogue state. Then, they manufacture consent through the media. Next, they initiate a conflict that costs billions, sometimes trillions. Finally, the reconstruction begins. Who gets the reconstruction contracts? Not your small business. Not the local construction company in your town. It's Halliburton. It's Lockheed Martin. It's the donors. And how is it paid for? It's paid for by devaluing your savings. When the government spends money it doesn't have, it has to print it. When it prints it, your dollar buys less. The Bolton files show that this wasn't an accident of war. It was the point of the war. To shift the burden of empire onto the shoulders of the people who can least afford it. The middle class is the piggy bank for the military-industrial complex. And John Bolton? He was the man with the hammer. But then, something happened. Something the architects didn't account for. The Internet. For decades, the playbook worked because they controlled the information. You saw what they wanted you to see on the 6 o'clock news. You read what they wanted you to read in the New York Times. But the digital age changed the math. Suddenly, the secret files weren't so secret anymore. Memos leaked. Whistleblowers spoke. The curtain was pulled back. And what did we see? We saw a man who was willing to risk a nuclear standoff just to maintain a narrative. We saw a man who viewed the American taxpayer as an infinite resource to be tapped for ideological experiments. But most importantly, we saw that the people were waking up. You are part of that awakening. The fact that you are watching this video right now means you have sensed the disconnect. You've felt the gap between what the politicians say and what your bank account reflects. They told you the economy was booming while you were working 3 jobs. They told you the world was safer while the borders were dissolving. They told you John Bolton was a patriot while he was signing the checks for your destruction. This is the reversal. The secret files aren't just a threat anymore. They are a mirror. They show us exactly how we were manipulated. And once you see the mechanism, you can't unsee it. Power works by controlling belief. If they can make you believe that these wars are necessary, they can take your money. If they can make you believe that the middle class is failing because of you, because you didn't work hard enough or you didn't save enough, then you won't look at the men in the West Wing. But the files prove it's not you. It was never you. It was a master stroke of policy. A realignment of wealth that has been 40 years in the making. We need to zoom out. This isn't just about one man. John Bolton is a symbol. He represents a civilizational pivot. For the first half of the 20th century, the goal of the American elite was to build a strong, stable, and prosperous middle class. Why? Because we needed a manufacturing base to win World War II. We needed a cohesive society to fight the Cold War. The middle class was an asset. But after the fall of the Soviet Union, something shifted. The elite decided they no longer needed the middle class. They had a global market now. They could manufacture in China. They could hide their money in the Cayman Islands. They could hire private security. The secret files of the late 90s and early 2000s, the ones Bolton was instrumental in drafting, show a pivot toward full spectrum dominance. This is a term used by the Department of Defense. It sounds like a military strategy. And it is. But it's also an economic one. Full spectrum dominance means controlling everything. The air, the sea, the space, the internet, and the wealth. To achieve this, the domestic population had to be neutralized. You can't have a full spectrum dominance abroad if you have a demanding, politically active middle class at home. You need a population that is too tired, too broke, and too distracted to interfere with the grand strategy. So, they exported the jobs. They imported the debt. And they sent the sons and daughters of the middle class to fight wars that only served to enrich the very people who were destroying their future. It was a perfect loop. A self-sustaining cycle of decline. The accepted truth is that John Bolton is a tough-talking defender of American interests. The reality found in the files is that John Bolton is an architect of American insolvency. They want you to focus on the mustache. They want you to focus on the rhetoric. They want you to argue about left versus right or Democrat versus Republican. But the files don't have a party. The playbook is nonpartisan. Narrator, whether it's a neocon Republican or a neoliberal Democrat, the trajectory for the middle class has remained exactly the same for 40 years. Down. Why? Because the foreign policy establishment, the world Bolton built, functions on a different currency than you do. You deal in dollars. They deal in influence. You deal in savings. They deal in sovereignty. You deal in the future of your family. They deal in the New World Order. When Bolton's secret files discuss the Middle East, they aren't just talking about oil. They are talking about the Petrodollar. This is the key. The middle class exists because the dollar is the world's reserve currency. This allows us to live beyond our means for a while. But to keep the dollar as the reserve currency, we have to keep the world under our thumb. That requires constant war, constant spending, constant debt. Eventually, the debt becomes so large that the only way to pay it is to tax the population through inflation. This is the hidden tax. The tax that John Bolton never mentions on Fox News or CNN. The tax that has destroyed the purchasing power of your salary. The tax that has made a college education a life sentence of debt. The tax that has turned the American dream into a secret file that most people will never get to read. I'm telling you this because the most dangerous thing to people like John Bolton isn't a foreign army. It isn't a rival superpower. It's your skepticism. For a long time, skepticism was treated as fringe. If you questioned the motives of the State Department, you were unpatriotic. If you pointed out the cost of these wars, you were isolationist. But the labels are failing. The labels are failing because the reality is becoming impossible to ignore. They've stopped buying the illusion. The factory worker in Ohio and the barista in Seattle might not agree on everything, but they both know one thing. The system is no longer working for them. The secret files are coming to light not because of a single leak, but because the weight of the lies has become too heavy for the vault to hold. When John Bolton speaks now, he sounds like a man from a different century. He sounds like a man who hasn't realized that the playbook has been compromised. But don't be fooled. The architects are still there. They are just finding new ways to frame the same old plan. They are looking for the next crisis. They are looking for the next reason to tell you why your quality of life has to be sacrificed for the greater good. This is why you must stay curious. This is why you must look behind the curtain. Power works in the dark. By understanding how John Bolton's secret files were designed to hollow out the middle class, you are taking the first step toward reclaiming your future. You are moving from a target of the playbook to a witness of the truth. In the world of John Bolton, it's a master stroke. The idea is simple. If you want to move a population toward a globalized, managed state, you have to make their current way of life unsustainable. You have to make them beg for a new system. The files reveal that as early as the late 1990s, the architects were worried. The American middle class was too independent. They owned homes. They had savings. They had a sense of agency. But the plan required a different kind of citizen. It required a service class. How do you turn a homeowner into a renter? How do you turn a saver into a debtor? How do you turn a citizen into a subject? You break the currency. The Bolton files discuss the end of the petrodollar, not as a tragedy to be avoided, but as a transition to be managed. For decades, the US dollar has been backed by the fact that oil is traded in greenbacks. This gave us an unfair advantage. It allowed us to print money and export our inflation to the rest of the world. But the files show that Bolton and his circle knew this couldn't last forever. So, instead of fixing the leak, they decided to blow up the dam. By pushing for aggressive sanctions and aggressive wars, they accelerated the de-dollarization of the world. They forced China, Russia, and the Middle East to look for alternatives. They'll tell you this was a failure of diplomacy. They'll tell you it was an unintended consequence. But the memos tell a different story. They show that the insiders wanted the dollar to lose its status. Why? Because a currency collapse is the ultimate reset button. It wipes out the savings of the middle class, while the elites, who own hard assets, land, and gold, emerge stronger than ever. It is the greatest wealth transfer in human history, and it was written down years before it began. You have to understand that John Bolton was more than a national security advisor. He was a bridge. He was the bridge between the shadow government, the permanent bureaucracy that never gets fired, and the elected officials who come and go. In the files, we see evidence of what we call the laboratory. This is where they tested their theories of population control. Not with weapons, but with narrative management. They've stopped buying the illusion, but for a long time, it worked perfectly. The laboratory discovered that if you keep a population in a state of exception, a constant emergency, you can bypass the Constitution. 9/11 was a state of exception. The 2008 financial crash was a state of exception. The 2020 pandemic was a state of exception. Every time a crisis hits, the middle class loses. Every time a crisis hits, the secret files are used to justify a massive expansion of government power and a massive contraction of individual wealth. Bolton's memos on national emergency powers are chilling. They discuss the ability to freeze bank accounts, to restrict travel, and to seize strategic resources, all in the name of security. But who defines security? The man with the mustache. The man behind the curtain. The man who has spent his life making sure that your security is the last thing on the agenda. This is the part they really didn't want you to see. In the final section of the Bolton files, there is a recurring theme: the unviability of the suburban model. To the architects of the new realignment, the American suburb is a problem. It's inefficient. It's decentralized. It's too hard to control. They want you in smart cities. They want you in high-density, managed environments where your every move is tracked by a digital ID and your carbon footprint determines your ability to buy a stake. But how do you get people to leave their 3-bedroom homes in the suburbs? You don't force them out. You price them out. By devaluing the currency, you drive up the cost of fuel. By driving up the cost of fuel, you make the commute impossible. By allowing private equity firms, who are often the same donors funding the think tanks, to buy up single-family homes, you destroy the dream of ownership. This isn't the free market at work. This is geopolitical engineering. The files show that the destruction of the middle class isn't a side effect of Bolton's wars. It's the precondition for the world they want to build next. They want a society of renters. They want a society of dependents. They want a society where the secret files are the only law that matters. But then, it backfired. Every architect makes a mistake. Every plan has a flaw. The flaw in the Bolton Playbook? They underestimated you. They thought that by the time we figured out the plan, it would be too late. They thought the middle class would be too broken, too divided, and too distracted to fight back. But something happened on the way to the final realignment. The skepticism they tried to suppress became a forest fire. The accepted truth began to crumble. People stopped looking at the TV for the news and started looking at their own lives. They started talking to each other. They started sharing the secret files in digital town squares like this one. This is the moment where the power shifts. The playbook only works when it's secret, when the narrative is the only story in town. But once you realize that the national security they're talking about is actually the security of their own power and the destruction of yours, the game changes. They've stopped buying the illusion because the illusion is too expensive to maintain. The master stroke was supposed to be the end of the middle class. Instead, it might be the birth of a new kind of resistance. A resistance that doesn't care about the labels of left and right, but cares about the reality of top and bottom. We are at a civilizational pivot point. The world that John Bolton helped build, a world of permanent war, endless debt, and managed decline, is dying. It has to. It's mathematically impossible for it to continue. The secret files are the blueprint for a house that is currently on fire. The question is, what comes next? Will we allow the same architects to design the next house? Will we let them transition us into a digital feudalism, where the middle class is a memory and the playbook is absolute? Or will we use this moment of strategic insolvency to reclaim our sovereignty? Skepticism is not a luxury. It is a survival mechanism. The elites call it misinformation. They call it dangerous. They call it a threat to democracy. But in Washington, democracy usually just means their ability to do whatever they want without your permission. Skepticism is the only thing that can break the loop. When you question the next threat, when you refuse to accept the next emergency, when you demand to know why the secret files are still secret, that is when the playbook fails. John Bolton's secret files were meant to be the obituary of the American middle class. They were meant to document our decline into a manageable, debt-ridden service class. But files are just paper. Plans are just ink. The real power doesn't live in a vault in the West Wing. It doesn't live in a memo from the National Security Council. It lives in your ability to see the truth. The middle class is not just an economic category. It is the backbone of a free society. It is the only thing that stands between a republic and an empire. And that is why they are so afraid of you. They aren't afraid of your vote. They're afraid of your awareness. Because once the middle class realizes that their destruction was a policy choice, the architects of that policy have nowhere left to hide. John Bolton and his files represent the past. A past of shadows and secrets. The future belongs to the curious. The future belongs to the skeptical. The future belongs to you. This has been a long journey into the heart of power. We've looked at the man, the plan, and the files that were designed to destroy everything you've worked for. But this is just the beginning of the conversation. If this video opened your eyes, if it connected the dots for you, I need you to do 3 things. First, drop a comment. Tell me, do you think that managed decline can be stopped, or are we already too far gone? I read as many as I can, and our community is where the real intelligence gathering happens. Second, share this video. The playbook relies on silence. Break the silence. Send this to one person who still thinks the system is working for them. Third, subscribe and stay curious. We are going to keep digging. We are going to keep looking behind the curtain. We are going to keep exposing the architects of the abyss until the light is too bright for them to handle. The secret files are open now. You know the truth. The question is, what are you going to do with it? Stay skeptical. Stay informed. I'll see you in the next deep dive.